Hello, so this is a review of slope-intercept form and graphing those. This is the second video in our review of slope-intercept form and in our unit, parallel and perpendicular lines. So, you should be on your day 2 packet, slope-intercept form and graphing. These are the answers to the PDN. By the end of this video, you will be able to understand how to do all of these problems. Again, this is slope-intercept form. You know this more as y equals mx plus b. That is how we graph lines, and that's where you're going to remember a little bit more about how to graph things and what slope-intercept form really means. So, let's pull out the notes in this and let's talk about slope-intercept form. So you remember slope-intercept form is mx plus b. So where the m is the slope and the b is the y-intercept. B is where you start or begin graphing. So the b will be a number. 3, 4, -2, it could even be 0. And that's where you are going to start graphing. So if I have my xy plane, my b will be on this line. So that would be where my b is. And then my m, like we did in the previous one, is my slope, which is my rise over my run. So at that point, I would say, okay, if this is my m is 2/3, I'm going to rise 2, 1, 2, and run 3, and I'm going to draw my line. And that's how I would graph. Again, you start at your y-intercept or your b, and then you use your slope, rise over run, to graph the line. So in this case, this question, I would begin at 3, and then -4 is the slope. So that turns into a fraction. -4 would be over 1. So I would, from that point, go 1, 2, 3, 4 down into the right one, and it would be a negative slope like that. We are also going to talk about how to write the equation of a line so you can graph it. And that's where you have a slope and a point, and we're going to plug those in and solve. So let's begin with just basics of plugging numbers in. So for number 1, I give you my slope and my y-intercept. So then I would say y equals 1/4 x. My y-intercept is 3, so plus 3. For these problems, 1, 2, and 3, I am plugging things in. Y equals -5 x plus 0. But the thing is, I don't show the plus 0. I actually wouldn't have that in. So you would just see something that says -5x. And you have to interpret that that y-intercept is 0. We don't usually write zeros because they just cancel each other out. And the last one, y equals 7x minus 2. So that negative sign turns into that subtraction, and that's how you would write the equation. Each one of these you can graph. So if I'm graphing this problem, I would start at 3, 1, 2, 3, and then from that point, I would rise 1 and run 4, and I would draw that line. For number 2, I would start at 0, which is my origin, and I would count down 5, and then go over 1, because that's a secret fraction 1, and I would draw the line there. For the last one, I would start at -2, which is down here. And then from that, I would count up 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And go over 1. Remember, there's always 2 movements, a rise and a run. So each time you get it into slope-intercept form, I start with my y-intercept and then I do my slope. The more intensive problems are with 4, 5, and 6. So, for number 4, I start with a slope of 3 and I have a point 46. Well, I start with this. So now I look and I say, okay, my slope is 3. So that's going to go in for my m. So y equals 3x plus b. Now, the 4, 6 is not my y-intercept. It is a point. But that point is made up of 2 numbers. The first number is the x, the second number is the y. So to find the equation, I'm going to take those 2 numbers and I'm going to plug them into my y equals mx plus b form. So the 6 is my y equals, my 3 doesn't change because that's still my slope. My x becomes 4 plus b. Now I have all these numbers and I can solve for b. So I'm not going to change 6. I'm going to multiply. 3 times 4 is 12 plus b. And now I can solve for b by getting rid of this 12. And I get -6 equals b. So the equation to this line is y equals 3x, again my slope, minus 6, my b. And I just plug that in. Another equation for this is number 5. So again, y equals mx plus b. That's my m. Y equals 1/2 x plus b. -2 and 8, xy. I plug in 8 equals my 1/2 -2 plus b. I'm going to make this -2 over 1, and I'm going to multiply straight across. So it becomes 8 equals -2 divided by 2 plus b. -2 divided by 2 is -1 plus b. To solve for b, I'm going to add 1 on both sides. And I got b equals 9. So to write the equation, I'm going to say y equals 1/2 x plus 9. And that is going to be my equation in slope-intercept form. For the last problem, my slope is -1, and I have my point 5, -2. So I always start y equals mx plus b. I plug in my slope. I plug in my point. I multiply. And I get rid of this number. I now take this and my slope, and I say y equals -1x plus 3, and I can graph that. That is my final answer. So that's how I solve these problems when I have a slope and a point. On the back side of this, I can also give you an equation in what we call standard form. Standard form starts with the x's and y's on the same side. And I have to move the x's away from it. So I have to solve for y. So the example up here gives you the step-by-step process. So the first step is always to move my x, and then get rid of the number in front of y, and then I simplify. After I simplify, I can then plot these equations. On the bottom are some practice problems with this. So it is just like solving an equation, only we have to deal with variables. So you draw the line through the equal sign. In the first one, I'm solving for y. I always solve for y, so I have to get rid of my x. And in this case, it's a 5x. So it is a positive number, so I'm going to subtract 5x from both sides. The 5x's cancel, so all I'm left with is y equals, and this side, this left side, is not a like term. So I write it as 30 minus 5x. Now, what you need to realize is this is my b, and this number is my m, because the m is always in front of my x value. So the m is always in front. I can also flip this around so that it's in y equals mx plus b form. You just have to remember that that's a negative 5x, and this is a positive 30. These two answers are the same, because the 30 is positive and the 5 is negative. In my second problem, number 8, again, I start with getting rid of my x. My x is positive, so I'm going to subtract it. What's left on this side is negative y equals 7 minus x. I then have to remember that this is not just a negative sign, it's a negative 1. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to divide by negative 1 to each one of these. I now have y equals 7 divided by negative 1 is negative 7. And a negative 1 divided by a negative 1, you see how there's two negatives here, becomes a positive 1x. I can leave my answer as this, or I can leave it as x, or 1x, minus 7. So these, again, are the same. Just because they are different order doesn't mean that they change anything. This is still my m, and this is still my b. The last one is the same type of problem, only now we have to deal with a little bit more fractions. So now in this case, the 4 is negative. So I'm going to add 4x on both sides. I am left with 3y equals 12 plus 4x. Now I divide by the number in front of y, and I divide each one of them by that 3. So I'm left with y equals 12 divided by 3 is 4, plus 4 divided by 3. I can't do it without getting decimals, and I don't want decimals. So leave it as a fraction. That fraction is your rise over run. So that becomes 4 over 3x. And you would leave it as that, or you can write it as y equals 4 over 3x plus 4. Again, those are the same answers. The 4 is going to be my b, and the 4/3 is going to be my m. I could graph any one of these. In my last example, now we are going to graph. So, I start off with 2x minus y equals 3. I draw my line through my equal sign. I move my x over. I'm left with negative y equals 3 minus 2x. I now am going to divide by that negative 1, because remember that negative sign here is a negative 1. I'm going to divide each one of these by a negative 1. I'm left with y equals 3 divided by negative 1 is negative 3. A negative 2 divided by a negative 1 is a positive 2x. And I can graph it right from here. So this number without an x is my b, this is my m. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start at negative 3, and I'm going to go up to 1, 2, and over 1. And I can continue that, up to, over 1. And I'm going to draw my line here. And that's how you solve when it's given in standard form. The next couple pages are your practice problems. This page steps through all of your how to plot and move things over. And when you complete these next practice problems, please complete the exit ticket and be ready for questions when I get back. Thank you very much.